Hello everyone, welcome to Live On Air this evening. With me is Peter Lane and David Hill. Today we're going to talk about eco-theology and green issues relating to the upcoming election in New Zealand. And I'd like to begin by just asking Peter and David to very briefly say how they come to be interested in ecology. What's the basic drivers for you guys?
Well, the basic driver for me, David Hill from Christchurch, the basic driver for me is that I've got two children and just looking at what sort of a world they're going to inherit and you know, the next generation beyond that, what are we leaving for them? I'm also a journalist with North Canterbury News and another rural newspaper, writing for rural and urban audiences. And you know, I've been involved in local issues, Walk for the Planet, which we can obviously talk about later, and other initiatives. And
yeah, and I must say you've been making a very big difference with things like Walk for the Planet, and also a kind of an impact with Bantam theology, which we'll come to later as well. But Peter, how about yourself? You're based in Auckland.
I'm based in Auckland. Professionally, I had a background in consulting engineering and before that IT, and in those roles I was being involved in being green for commercial sake. I was always rather skeptical about it, and then one day mutual colleague Prince Devanadan twisted my arm and suggested that I should go to a seminar in Geneva. And because it was Geneva, I thought it was a pretty good idea. But when I was there, it grounded for me the whole principle, biblical principles of care of creation being part of our response to God and caring for this magnificent resource that He gave us. And obviously, there are some aspects of that we humanity are not doing very well at the moment. So I came back, determined to find some things to do to help, and I'm involved in establishing an organisation called Green Churches Aotearoa, and in partnership with people working through other churches in New Zealand on complementary missions.
Well, but between the two of you, you've got this extremely rich and interesting background in ecological and theological issues. So I put that together under the one title of eco-theology. But just before we ask what are the main issues facing us in terms of eco-theology, David, I noticed today in one of your Facebook posts, you had just completed another Coursera course, and I must congratulate you on that. You are clearly addicted to doing Coursera courses, and this one was through the University of Edinburgh. And you've been writing a blog called Bantam Theology, which I think is a lovely little blog that pulls together all sorts of issues. But what was the course that you completed through Edinburgh?
Chicken welfare and behaviour.
Chicken welfare and behaviour. When I read it, I thought, my goodness, that is exactly the course that eco-theologist David Hill should be doing. What was it about?
Well, understanding the way chooks behave the way they do and how to look after them.
But isn't this also part of the problem that we've got in today's society, that the vast majority of people don't care about the welfare of chooks? That, you know, there's no real emphasis on the harm that we do as one species against another in farming these creatures. Would that be right?
Absolutely. I mean, to take an example from Walk for the Planet, on the final leg of Walk for the Planet, we stopped off in the red zone, in the red zone in Christchurch East, and And a member of local iwi talked about, raised the question, when we're considering water issues, why aren't we asking what does the river want? And in the same sense, you could ask, what does the bantam want? What do the chooks want to live a happy life? Even if we take the eggs off them and we might eventually send them to the slaughter, what do they want during their life so they can at least be happy for the life that they do have?
Yeah, I think these are the questions that we just ignore as a society, and we commit kind of a species racism against other species because we're consumed by our own sense of greed here. Well, let's move to the big issues that are, and I've asked each of you to say what you think are the two biggest green issues that are on the agenda today. Let's start with Peter.
The primary problem, and in essence, it won't be just New Zealand, but it's a global problem, is that and so we all of us, including New Zealand, need to grapple with this, is that we are effectively releasing too much carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases back into the atmosphere, and somehow or other we need to stop it. And to be fair, it would appear that the lack of progress we've experienced so far is probably more from lack of wanting than lack of capability. It's always hard to take something off someone that's become accustomed to it being around. So the motivation for some people to take what they see would give them a backward step in lifestyle is caused the whole issue to just go on the too hard basket and preferably stay there, preferably well buried under other issues.
And the recent election of Donald Trump in America has certainly pushed other issues up and buried the ecological problems.
There's certainly a lot of talk happening in the sustainability and eco-theology communities about the damage that Trump's policies or surmised policies will or won't cause in terms of an ecological improvement or otherwise. But I don't think he's done actually very much about it. It's more all about conjecture of what he might do, and on the other side of that story, I don't know that he's not going to do what people think he's going to do, but he hasn't done it yet.
Okay.
And what's the saying? While there's life, there's hope.
Okay, good answer. David, what's the primary eco-theology issue in your view?
Well, I sort of take the premise that everything is connected, and you can't really separate one thing from everything else, and that was something that I tried to emphasise in my Lenten study guide for Walk for the Planet. But if I was to name one, I'd say the economic system, and the second one would be water issues. And the reason why I say that is, people probably expect you to say climate change, but we can't really address climate change, which Peter sort of touched on, because of the economic system. Plenty of writers have highlighted this, and we just can't adequately address it. I mean, you look at, for example, this week, Stephen Joyce was celebrating that we had 3% economic growth. But, we're going to have to take a hit somewhere else, because if you keep having 3% economic growth every year, after 23 years, you've doubled your production, you doubled your consumption, and what impact is that going to have on the environment? Over 23 years, the population's not going to double.
Yeah.
Announcement was made by one company seeking to start mining again coal mining again on the west coast. Did that impact on either of you in terms of thinking about what have we made any progress over the last 20 years about sustainability of ecosystems in this country?
Well, it just highlights the fact that we're putting the economic system first, aren't we? We're seeing that we need to produce more production because we supposedly need to produce more so we can create more jobs, and then we need to sell it offshore because other countries want to buy it so they can pollute their environments, I guess. But we just don't think of the bigger picture. We only see dollar signs.
I've had some colleagues who would be livid about the coal mining announcement. I personally don't necessarily get that upset about it, though. No, I can't say that. I guess I don't care if they mine it, so long as they don't burn it once they get it out. But it's probably starting to be a bit unrealistic. I was reading a paper this week that was suggesting that in order for New Zealand to become 100% renewable energy based, the first thing we should do is close the Tiwai Point smelter. I think that's the same sort of symptom as the other things we've been talking about. It's we're unwilling to buck the economic status quo in order to make ecological changes.
Well, we've had quite a bit of viewer feedback come in, and Rilbegs is suggesting to both of you that actually new coal mining is simply wrong. Any comment about that, Peter and David?
I certainly wouldn't disagree.
Yeah, I don't want to water that down any either. My previous comments gave the impression that maybe I could tolerate it. Then that was my tongue engaged before my brain. So once it's out, it's much more accessible for processes that break it down to carbon dioxide. One of the things we can do in a positive manner in regards to greenhouse gases is to start sequestering carbon and doing things like reducing wood to biochar and burying it away, i.e. making a low-grade coal out of it, is one of the things we can actually do to start improving things. So essentially we have got this carbon that is locked up in a form that's not going to get to the atmosphere, and we're busy digging it out. Well, as soon as we dig it out, it's exposed to the atmosphere, and yes, okay, burning it may be the worst way of doing it, but it's not the only way. So let's keep it in the ground.
Just as a sort of a side issue there, Peter, you're quite active in LinkedIn. I'm not sure, possibly also Facebook, and in putting forward some of the alternative technologies that are appearing all the time. So that might lead into Max's question to both of you. Can you find any kinds of economic arguments that will help eco improvement? And it's the development of new technologies, new ways of thinking about things.
The answer is that there's so many different ways we can approach it and yes, the development of new technologies is certainly one of them, but it comes back to the economic status. Developing something from scratch or from close to scratch is economically a much more expensive process than refining an existing process. So the economic system that we have at the moment is not going to, in normal circumstances, will not encourage development of new processes in the absence of a profit motive, which usually boils down to we do it better or we do it cheaper.
David Hill, Stuart Mannins has sent in a comment that for him, global warming and water issues are primary things that we should be talking about and acting upon here in the New Zealand context. Have you got anything directly? Because water issues was one of your concerns for our local situation?
Well, I think it's a very easy one that, excuse me, that's a very easy one that people can identify with, particularly in Canterbury, because we have such a huge water resource in Canterbury, and there's been this perception in the last 10, 20 years that it's there to be exploited. And so it's something that people can readily engage with. And of course, it's so central to agriculture. And agriculture produces 49% of our greenhouse gases. So you can't really separate water issues from global warming in that respect. Because while we're polluting our waterways, we're also creating greenhouse gases.
What do both of you think about the current sort of, if I can, it's like a spring bubbling to the surface, concern about overseas companies coming in and bottling clean, green New Zealand water from certain locations, and really very little economic benefit to local communities. What, is that true, or is it?
Well, that's
something
exactly
we should be?
right. I mean, it's just the tip of the iceberg, though, because you've got overseas companies buying our dairy farms. We uncovered during Walk for the Planet that the same company that purchased the 16 Crayford farms also purchased 13 farms in Canterbury as well, which kind of went under the radar because of the earthquakes. And they signed off all these, there's a list of things that they said they would do to help the New Zealand economy. And the Overseas Investment Office is due to check them again this year because they haven't been doing those things, like creating jobs, planting trees, environmental projects. They just don't see them as a priority, and they make the excuses, oh, the milk price has dropped, or it's been too dry. But you signed an agreement, you know. But we seem to be too quick to sign off farms overseas, and just as the Ashburton District Council and others have been wanting to sell off bottled water.
What about the farming community, David? Because you cover that as part of your reporting. Are farmers divided on this issue, or do they feel that it's economically okay to sell off these big farms to overseas interests?
Oh, they're very much divided on it because, you know, traditionally, certainly from a dairy farming perspective, the traditional pathway was that a young person would work on a farm, work their way up, you know, build up their equity in buying cows, you know, eventually become a share milker, and those young people would then eventually become the farm owners of the future. But of course, the option of buying a farm is quickly being eroded, just as it's the prospect of young families buying a home now, because, you know, a lot of these farms are amalgamating. In the case of the 13 farms in Canterbury, it was family farms had been amalgamated to form one company, and then instead of, just like the Crayford farms in the North Island, instead of thinking, oh well, we'll sell 13 farms separately, they sold it as a package. So how many New Zealanders can afford to buy 13 farms, especially when you're competing against a billionaire from Shanghai?
Again, that's part of this wider economic model that we've got to figure out. How do we deconstruct and reconstruct the economic models that we live with in New Zealand today?
From the ecological perspective, that farm is producing 57 or nitrate losses of 57 kilograms of nitrates per hectare per year. Where those farms are, it's going to be 17 kilograms of nitrates per hectare per year. So how is a farm that's producing 57 even going to get close to that?
It's 3 times what it should be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So these questions aren't really being asked of how, you know, how can we actually improve the water quality, how we can improve the situation if these farmers can apply for a resource consent, you know, as long as they demonstrate that they're doing good practice, whatever good practice means, they don't necessarily have to reduce their pollution to the threshold. It's something I discovered just recently.
Will these things become pressure points in the upcoming New Zealand general election? What's your take from both of you on how green issues will impact on the major political parties and what spin they put on it for the general public?
Well, I think the rivers is a good example where we have actually put pressure on the government to the point that Nick Smith has promised to make our rivers swimmable by 2040. Now, exactly how he's going to do that under the current regime is yet to be seen, but he's at least realised that people are concerned about the quality of our rivers. So very much as people, we can start to demand our politicians address rivers. I
think that's definitely true. The river and the water quality of the rivers is definitely going to be a plank of environmental plank in a number of election portfolios, but I don't see that the flip side, that the quantity of nitrates being returned through dairy farms will ever become an issue, and that will, even though the two are causally linked, and that could be part of the problem. We're happy to clean up the rivers where they become public property, but we're also happy for people to make money by making a job for us to clean up.
Do you think that our main political parties, and I mean by that the Greens, Labour, National and New Zealand First, the four big ones, or bigger ones, do you think that they really do have politicians that care about environmental issues? I don't mean that the whole party or all the politicians, but do you feel that there are some people that care about this and want to get better outcomes?
The ones I talk to generally do, but as with any part of society, you get politicians just as you get people that get caught up in the economics and the politics of things. But there certainly are genuine MPs out there, just not enough of them.
I would hesitate to suggest that any of those parties don't have individuals within the organisation that are committed to trying to do something better. But if you look at the track record to date, to the best of my knowledge, only one of those four parties has got any comprehensive policy statement about the environment. A couple of the others have sort of got some snippets here and there or tucked in as part of something else. Yeah, there's only the one party that's actually published a very high level, but at least sort of encompassing most of the territory that needs to be covered.
Why I put the question that way was that I think there are genuine people across the political spectrum, genuine politicians who really do care about those long-term future issues that David Hill was talking about. You know, what kind of country are we, but what kind of environment are we bequeathing to our children, to our mokopuna? But at the same time, it is true what Peter Lane is suggesting, that it's really only the Green Party that in a sense has this as the defining issue. And that to me is very, very significant, because if you move right away from the world of politics, green issues are of extreme importance to most people in society. But I'm not going to sling off at the political parties, because I suspect that they do more than the Christian churches do. And we've been talking about ecology, but our topic is really eco-theology. And David Hill and Walk for the Planet produced the Lenten resources and did a whole heap of individual things that brought churches or members of churches, people from the secular community, etc., together in a totally different kind of way. Would you like to explain? I mean, that was a great help, in my opinion, for all churches. Would you like to talk a little bit about that, David?
Well, it was just like a river, really. It had, like a braided river, there were so many different streams flowing in all different directions, and it was very hard to keep track of it. It's still an evolving thing, even though we had the last walk, so to speak, and finishing on Easter Sunday. We had a film crew which is in the process of editing all the film footage, and hopefully it'll be in the New Zealand International Film Festival in Christchurch in August. So it's still an evolving thing, but it's, I guess the best way to describe it is rather than the church necessarily taking the lead on it, the church provided some resources and allowed people to get on with it, and it just evolved. We started off with Mark Gibson and myself having conversations, and basically for 6 months it was just Mark and I talking, and then we got a couple of other people started coming to meetings with us, and suddenly in January we had a whole lot of people, and then suddenly our Facebook page has got up to 404, I think now. I think Mark noted that over 1,000 people attended throughout the 7 weeks. We had Environment Canterbury gave us some money so that to help pay for the film crew doing the filming, just because they wanted to engage with us. Basically, they didn't control it, but they wanted to engage, which was incredible, really.
So many different people became involved with it. So you had hundreds of people involved with Walk for the Planet, from just a couple of guys sitting around having a bit of a talk about what can we do.
Having a coffee
and in the same way,
in New Brighton.
Right. Peter Lane, you've got a kind of a similar objective with Green Churches Aotearoa.
Yeah, I was just listening to David and thinking, gee, this is exactly how this is happening. Green Churches and a couple of other things I'm involved with. I seem to have been rabbiting on about it to people for a long time now, and it's suddenly at the point where it's actually coming up on agendas of other organisations, and people are reaching out to me, or people who aren't friends of mine and sort of have heard my rabbiting a bit more than the average person, are reaching out and saying, what can you do to help us? So on good days I'm encouraged by that. On bad days I'm scared stiff as to how I'm going to live up to the hype I've created. But yeah, it's a growth movement. I guess the only thing that really scares me is it all too little too late? But that doesn't mean it's not worth trying.
Yeah, I in some ways it's kind of getting a critical mass together, isn't it?
Yes.
And here I mean a critical mass of people who start to think the same way, and their effective thinking and doing things just that little bit differently may tip certain balances. And I suspect that the two of you are tapping now, getting close to being able to tap into something deeply in the national psyche about the water issues in a way that maybe we haven't been able to do in terms of the climate issues. The water issues.
Just a perfect storm. We couldn't have envisaged in March last year, when Mark and I started talking about it, that rivers were going to be such a hot topic. I mean, I think the month before we launched Walk for the Planet, Nick Smith announced his so-called plan to make a river swimmable by 2040, and there was public reaction saying this is just ridiculous. His plan was not going to work, and you had Dr. Mike Joy from Massey University down at Selwyn River filming down there just before Walk for the Planet, and there was just all these things going on, and since we've finished the walking, you've had these 2 freshwater reports that have come out. So there's just a perfect storm. The timing just couldn't have been better for us.
Maybe that's what they mean in the Bible when they talk about the kairos moment, the right moment. The issue becomes the defining moment. And I suspect that both of you, and it takes years to build up to be able to get some momentum, particularly in organisations like churches, which by their nature are very slow moving, not quick to change. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but their nature is to conserve what they have. But here I think there's just a general re-evaluation in many parts of at least the Methodist Church, and I suspect the Union Cooperative Ventures, and probably Presbyterians and Anglicans too. There's just a general drift towards better understanding of these issues. I'm aware that we're coming close to the end of our time, but I'd just like to draw your attention back to the fact that the 3 of us met to start talking about these issues. It must be about 18 months ago. I'll have to look it up, but we've done one live on air about these kinds of things before, and in my opinion, this was the right time because there has been this build-up to being able to get the message out there in new kinds of ways. Do you feel the same?
Yeah, I do. I think that with the work that I've been doing, the things are sort of coming together to the point that, for one thing, there's a real desire between the different mainline denominations to actually do some work in coordination with each other, not to do the same work, but to understand that there are people in this organisation that have a passion for lobbying politicians. There's people in this group that have got a passion for divestment, fossil fuel divestment and those types of activities. There's other groups that are more interested in what can happen at the coalface, what can happen in local communities that actually do something positive to reduce the amount of carbon going back to atmosphere.
Stuart Mannins, you've got a comment that you'd like to make.
Yeah, I found this all very interesting, and I've been informed about things that I've suspected haven't been going on, and concerns that are there that I would like to support and develop, even though I'm an old fellow and can't do much myself. I can support, and I do encourage you to go on the way you're doing. I think it's wonderful. It's part of my rationale for being a Christian.
Oh, thanks, Stuart. Thanks, David. I was amazed to find some of the stuff happening that I wasn't aware about, even though I had thought I had been diligently keeping my ear to and appreciate your support.
Yeah, I think David Bell had asked the question, do churches hinder or help these things? And I think to give a probably hopefully not too long an answer to that question, I mean, churches are by their nature established institutions, and established institutions by their nature tend to protect their own. But if churches can kind of in some ways nurture but be willing to step back at the same time, they have resources. They have powerful resources, as we found with Walk for the Planet. I mean, there's money, there's cash there sometimes, and there's buildings for public forums. There's hospitality available. But to get change, you need leadership, and leadership I feel is provided by people rather than institutions, and you just need people to stand up and like Peter or Mark Gibson or people just to stand up and do something, and others will join in.
I think the work that the two of you are doing each in your own spheres of influence, but particularly the fact that you both use social media to advantage in putting forward these issues. I know that it's second nature to younger people, but to an older age group, social media is a difficult thing to use and to get one's head around.
Well, I had a little quote there that I found from my Lenten study guide, and it was from Garrett Hardin, who once wrote, "The essence of dramatic tragedy is not unhappiness. It resides in the solemnity of the remorseless working of things." And I take remorseless working of things to mean business as usual. And I think that sums up what we've been saying. Peter and I have probably both been saying. That's what we've got to get away from. We've got to get away from business as usual and find another way forward. Because we can. Because we believe we can.
Absolutely. And isn't it marvellous how Garrett Hardin has become part of the dialogue, the essential dialogue between people like David Hill and Max Thompson and all the others that did that wonderful course from Wesleyan University, How to Change the World. And Garrett Hardin, yeah, the commons, what is the commons and who has power over the commons. Peter Lane, what about yourself? Final closing comment from you.
Part of the motivation in this topic at this time in New Zealand is there's an election coming up. So you may think that you're getting old and doddery, but you can still engage with your politicians. You can still ask them, what is it that you stand for? What is it that your party stands for? Let's get some hard document to us what it is you're going, and we can discuss it and work out whether it's what we want our future government to do or not, because it's important to us. And having that discussion is probably 9/10 of the battle in the current areas that or in circumstances that we find ourselves, at least in the short term.
Well, those are both great answers, and I want to just say thank you very much for being part of yet another live on-air discussion on eco-theology today, and we'll see you next time, maybe before the election, maybe just after it, to see what we actually achieved. Thank you indeed, and we'll say good evening.
Good evening.